The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Canna Chat in the Zone. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And my guest today is just a terrific guy. He's a marijuana activist and a mensch. Mr. Moskowitz. How are you?
Hi, Ralph. How are you?
All right. You're the reason there is a Canna Chat. You and I devised this show 2 or 3 months ago, and it's going great guns. I don't know if you heard an episode that I did with Dan Rush, the convicted union leader who basically had a career that I consider to be synonymous with Jimmy Hoffa in a lot of ways. Jimmy Hoffa was accused of stealing money from the union, and it was $11,000. He went to prison for stealing, quote, $11,000 from the union. Okay. Dan Rush and Jimmy Hoffa said if it wasn't for me, there would be no union. And Dan Rush ran into a lot of problems, some that he created and some that, according to his testimony, the government trumped up on him, if you'll excuse the Trump expression. So I saw an analogy there, and I spoke with him on the air for about an hour and a half, and he was contrite about a number of things. He said he made some mistakes. One of the mistakes he claims to have made was trusting the people around him and misjudging how much the government wanted to get. The federal government was and is so anti-marijuana that they had people wired. They wired his attorney. They had these guys flipping and turning state's evidence. In the meantime, he was charged initially with enough counts to put him away, felonious counts to put him away for the rest of his life. And they settled when he finally pleaded at the end, because they knew they didn't really have him. He pleaded to a few little charges. They weren't little, they were felonious charges, but it amounted to 3.5 years in federal prison, which means he'll be out in a year, and he must pay $15,000 in a fine. Tells me they didn't have a good case that was substantial, and they settled with him when they stripped him of all his money, all his respect, to fight the government, and I think they screwed over him. And today comes out a statement by Sessions, is that how to pronounce his name, the Attorney General's, who says, we haven't given up yet, quote, we haven't given up on trying to stop marijuana. We think it's bad. We're considering going into California and we'll accept it that medical marijuana is this, that, and the other thing, but we're considering going into California and closing down recreational marijuana. Like you're going to close it down. Like if we, you, me, and all of our friends who, if it weren't legal, we'd be going back to being scofflaws. And that brings us to the case right here in Alameda, our hometown, which is now pretty much forcing the issue because they've denied recreational marijuana when overwhelmingly the people in Alameda voted by 68%. 2/3 of the voters voted for recreational marijuana being legal in the last election. Now, we both agree that we're being represented by folks that aren't really representing us. So, Rich, if you would be so kind as to fill us in a little bit about the situation and how it came to pass that when the city council decided to exclude recreational marijuana from the plan, the budget, the plan. Rich,
Sure.
if you will.
Sure, absolutely.
Poorly worded question, perhaps, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do indeed. So it's probably good just to run back through a little ancient history here on the island, so to kind of place the present-day situation in some context. So obviously, cannabis has been on the island just like it's been everywhere for a very long time. About 8 years ago, under existing law, a business came in and started a medical dispensary. The city had no real laws about this, and they did not really state that they were going to be a dispensary as much as a general retail permit. Well, anyway, long story short, small island, everybody knew. They were quickly shut down, and then the existing city council that time passed a moratorium and said no cannabis. Now, move forward to about 2 years ago, and the League of Cities that advises a lot of cities around the state of California came and we paid for this information, and they said best practice would be to ban growing of marijuana. So the city moved ahead and they banned growing. Now, in the interim, this whole time, Alameda has treated both the consumption of cannabis and the personal growing of cannabis as they do many things, in that we are a city that is not, we don't go and knock on doors, we wait for complaints. So, for instance, many people grew cannabis in their backyards, and if their neighbors weren't bothered, it was no big deal. If their neighbors were bothered and they, I'd assume, didn't talk to their neighbors or did and they didn't have a resolution, the police would be called and they would come and knock on the door and talk about it and say, you can't do this, your neighbors are complaining. And it was very casual, much the way things should be. Now, we move forward to this year when the city council, after the vote last November, the city council had a motion initially put forward by Jim Odie stating cannabis businesses we should look at this issue and maybe consider it for Alameda. Move forward to 2017, April or May of this year, nothing was happening on this very low priority issue. And our mayor, Trish Spencer, she put a high priority resolution in to start discussing this for real because it's already April and the state was going to offer legal adult use consumption in January. So the city council started holding hearings. Several groups here got formed to help promote cannabis businesses as being good for Alameda, a way for locals to step up from a cottage industry, et cetera, et cetera. So I am somewhat happy to say that through that whole process, just recently it became finalized that the city has now allowed 2 medical dispensaries. They will allow 2 cannabis laboratories, 4 manufacturing businesses, and on-site consumption at the dispensary I believe it's not been spelled out, if you've purchased your cannabis there. But everywhere else, cannabis is illegal to smoke. Outdoors, indoors, if you don't own your home, there is no place. So, and that's all medical. This is people's medicine. So to get directly to the question you asked, when these conversations started, then very quickly, Trish was the champion of this whole issue. And very quickly, people did not want adult use. The city council very quickly started throwing flack, and the only hope for moving this process forward was to exclude adult use. So Trish, wanting to provide what the citizens wanted, still needed several votes to pass city council, so adult use was dropped from this whole discussion. And here's the problem, Ralph. I live in a city that I love. And this city, as you stated, 68% of the people who voted in the last election, and it was a big turnout. We have 80,000 residents, I believe, just under 40,000 turned out to vote. And it was a big turnout for obvious reasons, what was happening on the national political level. But the city of Alameda voted almost 10% higher than the whole state of California for adult use cannabis. And I'm a little confused, to be honest with you, as what do our elected representatives think that we voted for? Do they think that we voted for the ability to buy adult use cannabis? Well, we did. Do they think that we voted for the right to consume adult use cannabis? Yes, they did. So why are they doing what the people did not want? We did not want it banned. We want this whole thing to be normalized. We want the people to come out of the shadows. We want the people to feel comfortable, not only from a medicinal level, but from a recreational level. We have opioid issues. We have alcohol issues in this country. More and more, we're finding that cannabis can provide a safe, recreational, end-of-day relaxation, and nobody has ever died from it. You know, nobody's ever become addicted physically to it. So adult use has come into the mainstream, and here we are telling our city officials that we support this, and here the city officials are totally ignoring us. And as an Alamedan, as an American, this fundamentally bothers me. It makes me wonder who our elected representatives are serving, because I grew up in America where we elected people to represent the people. And all of a sudden the people have spoken, and best case scenario I can say is our elected representatives may have wax in their ears.
Right. Well, they may have wax in their ears, or their palms are turned upward to accept bucks from lobbyists who don't want it. I would, just off the top of my head, wouldn't the bar owners in this town all get together and throw a little bucks their way? Because marijuana definitely competes with alcohol.
Well, it's interesting you say that.
Doing that?
No, but I don't think so, because it's interesting you say that. It points out another stigma on marijuana that's still there that nobody's willing to talk about. Everyone knows that in this city, in any bar that has an outside patio, your people are smoking cigarettes. That is against Alameda law. In those patios, people are probably hitting vaporizers too. Nobody's probably lighting joints because of the smell. But so
you don't even have to go on a patio with a vape. You can do it right in front of their face. They won't know it.
But my point is the double standard is the city enforcement people, be they elected or employed, choose to ignore cigarette smoking in bars, which kills hundreds of thousands of Americans a year and is expressly against Alameda's laws, and we have a very strong anti-smoking law. Why do they do that? I'm not sure.
Well, alcohol itself in those bars kills millions of people, to say nothing of the drunk drivers and what have you.
Right.
The deterioration of bodies from alcohol. And not only that, liquor stores are within 2 or 3 feet from schools. There's a liquor store in the corner of where Haight School is, for instance.
Well,
right.
But the point is the double standard, right? So I don't think bar owners, like you say, would get together and do this. I think that they enjoy the fact that cigarette smoking is overlooked and cannabis smoking will most likely be overlooked. But I ask you this. The anti-cannabis people in Alameda, and of course there's some, roughly a third from the voting statistics, they're worried about the children, right? Well, I worry about this. I ask them if they see people smoking, and that's against the law, cigarettes, and that's just generally ignored, And maybe that'll be the case with cannabis, maybe not, but it's definitely the case with cigarettes. So my question is, if you pass laws that are not going to be enforced, aren't we teaching our children not to respect the law? So it's
or if they see what mom and dad do and, keep it, kids are smart. They understand.
Well,
right. So it's this double standard thing that I find really bothersome. And you touched on it too. I said the best case scenario was they had waxing areas. There is a worst case scenario here. And at some level, I would like to know why 4 out of our 5 city council members refused to even have a conversation about adult use when the citizens did this. And it makes me wonder, Ralph, I think we live in a state. I think we live in a state with direct democracy. And
Ralph?
Ralph?
Would you call back in about, excuse me, Rich.
No, David Finoli and I are supposed to do tonight at this time.
Okay.
You want me to use the other number?
Okay.
I don't know when he's going to call. I'm probably calling on this number also.
I'll tell you what, Rich. We're going to take a time out. We're going to turn over these microphones to Mr. Blumpkin, and I'll push the button. We'll stop it, and we'll resume the conversation. We'll talk off the air, and we'll call back on another number. It's all yours, Alan.
Thank you.
And you and I, Rich.
Yeah, well, keep me informed so we won't have this mix-up anymore.
I will.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right.
Okay, signing off.
I'm back. We're with Rich Moskowitz, and we are talking Alameda politics and how it really concerns cannabis and the new laws. Rich, who are the dissenters on this? It was a 3-2 vote. Tris naturally voted for it. Who else voted for it, and who voted against it?
So for the medical cannabis businesses, Jim Odie and Malia Vela were pro, along with Trish, which is why it passed. And 2 dissenting were Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft and Frank Matarisi.
Okay. Now you have an alternative plan, but the first thing that hit me, let's make the voters of Alameda aware who these people are and specifically see to it that these 2 folks don't get elected next time. Now,
not everybody's up for election, Ralph. Remember, every 2 years, we only put up 2 council members. So,
all right. So with that in mind, let's get some instant results, and you have a wonderful plan. Tell me about that.
Sure. First off, I'd like to say I'm 100% in agreement with what you just said. The voters of Alameda, especially the pro-cannabis voters of Alameda, need to know the whole story, exactly what happened, and if they don't like what happened, express their disapproval at the ballot box this coming November 2018. Now,
right, and I contend that even those who didn't vote for marijuana should know that the city council isn't taking care of the interests of the majority of folks. Doesn't matter what the issue is. If they're not taking care of, right? If you're against marijuana, you should see an injustice that because marijuana was voted for by 68% of the people in Alameda, you should see an injustice that the city council doesn't support those people.
Absolutely. So, and what we're speaking about there, cannabis is strictly an example, but not the issue. The issue there is that we voted for representatives, and they're not representing the people. God knows who they are representing, but not the voice of the people. Now, on the cannabis issue, as we were mentioning before, Alameda specifically voted higher than the whole state for adult use. So, being that our city council has decided not to allow adult use in Alameda against what the citizens want, it seems to me that we should be exploring putting a ballot measure on that issue next November, 2018, and express our point of view. So
Rich,
the way this works,
for we ignorant people, what does a ballot measure amount to? How do you go about it? What's the effect of having a ballot measure? And
sure.
Is it on election day when, or you just, how is it done?
Sure. So let's work through some of the bigger and then the littler mechanics of this. So on a statewide level, when you successfully put a ballot measure out there, which we all vote on hundreds of them, or it feels like hundreds of them, what that means uniquely in our state, like with Proposition for Cannabis last year, is traditionally that then becomes law as written. It is not open to government meddling, and it is not open to judicial interpretation. Cannabis last year differed a little bit because in the measure we gave the state the right to change what we put in. So that, whether you think that was a mistake or not, I personally do, but that was what was done. So now, I'm not saying it's exactly the same in Alameda. I've not looked into it, but the basic mechanics of putting a ballot measure on our upcoming ballot, November 18, would be you have to gather signatures, and there's a percentage of the people who voted in the last election. Roughly for Alameda, I looked it up. The exact number escapes me, but
Rich, would you speak into the phone a little bit?
Sure. It's under 5,000 signatures for the city of Alameda based on the last election. So if you can gather, and there's a form put out by Alameda County that you would gather signatures on. Once the necessary number of signatures were gathered, it'd be submitted to the county. They would verify by random sampling that those are actually signatures that are correct. And then the ballot appears next November. Once, of course, once you've been on the ballot, as we've all experienced, that's when the advertising starts. So anybody who's for or against it is free to express their opinion. But at a really high level, Ralph, that's how something becomes a ballot. And at the state level, that's what's unique about it, is that it is not open to interpretation. So what I would hope, and again, I've not done all the research, so I can't speak to the facts yet, but what I would hope is that we as citizens of Alameda would be able to put a ballot initiative on the upcoming electoral ballot, which is November 18, basically stating that we want adult use available here, and then depending on how we chose to write the ballot, now remember, this would be writing a law at the state level, or similar to, so we have to specify exactly what we want. Do we want stores? Do we want delivery? Do we want businesses? But do we want on-site consumption? So that would be all spelled out in the crafting that would be presented to the people, and we've all read our pamphlets that are distributed with ballot measures, and there's a lot to this process, but I kind of at a point, Ralph, to be honest with you, that the little guy seems to take it on the chin an awful lot in America. And what I mean by that is...
Not just with marijuana, in life.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Not just the unions and not just big businesses. The little guy's voice isn't heard. And what makes Alameda really unique is we're a small island. We know each other. We love our community dearly.
Rich, speak up just a little bit.
Sure. We love our community dearly. And the thing is, if we want something and our representatives are not giving it to us, then we have to show them how this needs to be done. And if there's ramifications to that we spoke about earlier, so be it. But the little guy in America keeps taking it on the chin, and what elected representatives need to start to understand is they are elected by the people, for the people. They are not elected to do what they think is best. They're elected to do what we collectively think is best. Now, if an issue is so controversial that it's 55-45 or 50-50, Well, that's understandable. Nobody's really clear on what they want. But when it comes to cannabis and adult use, 2/3 or 68% is a pretty clear number. So whether we have the ability to put an ballot initiative or not, I think this conversation needs to continue because the elected representatives need to understand that the people are not satisfied by them not listening to us.
And if these people think that recreational use will be in any way curtailed because they don't vote it in and allow us the privilege of paying taxes and inflated prices because for marijuana, you don't think that we'll be scofflaws and consume and sell and buy?
In the words of Jim Odie on the dais at City Council, he stated in one of the meetings when people were debating this, Jim Odie's words were, if you don't think marijuana is here already, all you need to do is walk down Park Street and buy the bars on any weekend night and you can smell it. So if that is an adult use in the bar, I have no idea, but you're absolutely
So what are they doing?
right.
They're cutting off their noses to spite their face because they could generate a lot of money in taxes for the city.
Right. So who are they serving? That's the underlying question here that
they're not even serving themselves. If the idea is to bring in revenue, and when this legalization first came out, I'm thinking, well, we're going to pay taxes to support the police who did everything they could to put we users, scofflaws, in jail beforehand. So I wasn't crazy about legalization. I like it because it gives control. The people know what they're buying now. With legalization, it's being tested. Pesticides are being kept out. I think it's great that it's legal. But to deny it in the city, I mean, I want to go crazy nuts because the big bucks that they can bring in, and why do you think the state legalized it and wanted it legal? For the money, for the tax money. So why deprive Alameda? And why make people who aren't scofflaws have to go over the bridge, the moat that we have? We got bridges and tunnels to cover the Alameda moat. They're just going to have to go into Oakland to buy their stuff. And a lot of people don't want to do that.
Oakland, Berkeley, Hayward, San Francisco, every city around us, their representatives heard the people that they serve and put sensible laws and taxation and revenue-generating strategies to help the cities by listening to the people and allowing adult use. Alameda is sticking their head in the sand as the proverbial ostrich and saying, we're not going to allow adult use, even though it's already here and even though the citizens want it. And to be honest with you, I go back and forth, Ralph, and maybe it's because I'm a Libra. Some days I get really upset about this because it's irrational, like you're saying, monetarily, and it's recriminalizing behavior that the state has said is not a crime. Other days, right, I get really sad, and the reason I get sad is because it feels to me like democracy is failing. And we all know as Americans that it's manipulated, and we know with Citizens United, corporations or people, even though they don't have heartbeats or EEGs, but the bottom line is this is a small town. Democracy shouldn't fail in Alameda. So some days I'm sad because maybe it's not even sadness. Maybe it's just utter confusion of saying, who are these representatives serving when they're not serving the people? The city's website is so good that they even put on their website, I believe because of state law, when you take political donation, you have to declare it. So the city, on the city's website, under the disclosure filing campaign statement section, these forms called 460s are all listed so that people can have a view into who their candidates solicit donations from. And when I click through on the website for the filings that were most recently filing at the end of July, it just goes to a page that, shows me basically nothing. It's basically, it's like it's not a 404, but it's technically like a 404. It shows the name of the organization, and when you click into the document, it basically says the system has encountered an error. So I get sad, I get confused, and I wonder why our politicians are not expressly following the will of the people who gave them their jobs with the understanding that they would represent us. We live in a representative democracy. And so,
you know what got me is, and you explained it to me, and I want you to explain it to the audience. You explained it to me off the air, how it was possible that we let such an important issue be decided by two council people who are being investigated for corruption.
Okay, so let's be clear. That's a pretty big word you used there. So let me back that down a little bit.
Well, I think it's corrupt. I think it's corrupt if the firemen's union tries to control who's going to be the next fire chief.
No. There's no doubt about that. But what I say it's a big word is because, we live in America. Nothing's been proven. There's been allegations, and they're being investigated.
Allegedly. Okay, allegedly.
Right.
Good.
But your point is obviously about Malia Zella and Jim Odie. So just to fill in the audience, having nothing to do with cannabis whatsoever, Alameda was hiring a new fire chief, and our city charter expressly forbids anybody but the city manager to be involved in that process, and therefore it's not political. Apparently, it was written in the paper anyway, that things were said and pressure was put on the city manager that made her feel uncomfortable and was towards a candidate that she did not think was the best candidate. That's expressly illegal. It's against the city charter. So what the city council did is they voted 5-0, including Malia and Jim Odie, to have a third party investigate what went down. Now, that's an ongoing investigation. The people of Alameda will eventually be told what was found. There's no secrets there. But in the interim, yes, those were the two votes, along with the mayors, that made medical cannabis legal. And quite honestly, I don't think those issues are related at all. However,
no, the issues aren't related, but it comes to if somebody's under investigation, should they be allowed to make decisions? Should they be suspended? Should they be?
Well, that's probably for a better legal mind than mine. I'm not a lawyer. I've never gone to law school or anything like that, so I don't know if I can answer that. But what I can do is I can show a thread between those two and cannabis and these issues, because as I've been saying, I wonder who our city council serves, because they did not serve the people, in my opinion. Now, I wonder, clearly there's an accusation out there that, let's just call it politics as usual, which leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. So I almost wonder if, in the next election, if this is going to come back up and say, hey, look, don't forget about everything else. We voted for cannabis people. Don't forget that. And the real deal that, as you said earlier, is Alamedans need to know the whole story, because they didn't really vote. Yes, they voted for medical cannabis. Yes, Jim Odie acknowledged that cannabis is already here. Yes, they gave us something, a breadcrumb. But I wonder about that motivation. Trish was the only one, Mayor Spencer was the only one who said, no, this needs to be done for medicine. Adult use is adult use. It's we're all adults. If we consume alcohol, it's our choice, and we should do it wisely. If we consume cigarettes, well, that is also our free choice, and I don't know if there is a wise way to consume cigarettes, but
I don't know why it's even being debated. Wasn't it determined in the last election that it's legal now? What's the problem?
It is legal, however. The state has respected the fact that we're such a divergent population, and they allowed the cities, based on what we voted in, to choose what's right for their populace. And I support that. Not every city is like Alameda, as we know. There are cities in the Central Valley who are very, very different than Alameda. So if the local people don't want something, the local people shouldn't have it foisted on them. Our situation is the exact opposite. We want something that is totally legal, and they're saying, we think you're old enough to make a wise decision for yourself, so we're going to decide for you that we're not going to allow it, even though only a third of the people don't want it. And this is a fundamental injustice. This is why, and this is my tie-in to the other two, if they are accused, if they are found to have been in violation of the city charter, as they have been accused, or as we're exploring if they were or not, it just, to me, continues to show politicians not doing what they were elected to do. And to be honest with you, I don't have enough hair to pull my hair out anymore, but I'm pulling my hair out here because it seems to be a rampant thing that politicians are in it for somebody other than the elected, the people, the electorate. And that is fundamentally not what they taught me in civics class in all my education. So,
well, I learned in the College of Hard Knocks, I've learned that there's an unholy trinity out there. It's the church, big business, not just the church, organized religion, let's put it that way, big business, and government. And the three conspire to just make life miserable for the working person, the middle-class person, the citizen.
The person who wants to smoke a joint after they get off their 2 jobs so they can afford their rent. And they just want to smoke a joint and relax. So that's why I say...
And it's legal to do so in California.
Right. And that's why I say the people need to take on your triumvirate. The people need to speak in a solid, united voice so that our politicians not only hear us, that's the first step, but they understand that they're on notice. They either do the job of representing the people or they see what the unemployment line looks like. That, I think, is the only alternative left here. And I'm not even talking about cannabis. I'm talking about every issue that the people of the city or the state or the country are not divided on. When there's a 2/3 majority on an issue, it's not 50+1. That's called a mob. 2/3 is a very high bar to build consensus on. So we have that on cannabis. We do not have that on many issues that we face. Development, rent control. I mean, these are big issues in Alameda, but on this big issue in Alameda, we do have consensus. And this is why the politicians need to hear us, and they need to start cleaning up their act on issues that are of an ilk like cannabis, that are of a consensus. At least in my opinion, and hopefully the people of Alameda feel the same. And then I say, let's get together.
We talked about Ashcraft and we talked about Odabe, or however he pronounces it. We didn't talk about Frank Matarese. What's his stance been? How has he managed to come up with a vote that was against this? What was his rationale?
I think Frank Matarese is a really good guy. I think Frank Matarese has what he considers the best interests of the electorate in his opinion. But I also think Frank Matarese represents an Alameda that has gone by the wayside. We are no longer a single color. We are no longer a single economic grouping. We are no longer a single mindset. We are an extremely progressive town. We are an inclusive town. Everyone loves this town. However, I think Frank, I don't know what's going on with Frank. Frank was the one who, in the council meeting, the state has a rule for all businesses in the state for cannabis that says if you have 20 or more employees, you have to have a labor peace agreement. That is something that allows the unions to come in. You cannot prevent a union from coming in and organizing if employees want it. Malia Vela, an employee, full-time employee of the union, also a part-time city vice mayor of Alameda, suggested and put forth a 10-person threshold as opposed to 20. Now, Frank Matarese, strangely enough, who'd been fairly silent and always a no vote on this issue, all of a sudden voiced that he wants a one-person threshold. In fact, I believe it was Marilyn Ezzy Ashcroft who said, probably should be two people because one person doesn't really have disagreements with themselves. And the council laughed, and then Frank put forward a two-person minimum. Now, let's be clear. I am not against labor agreements, but what I am against is putting more hurdles in for small business. In the cannabis business, first off, you pay 70% taxes to the federal government. Second off, you pay for permits and conditional use permits and on and on and on within the state and then within the municipality. So these are all hurdles into this business where the populace thinks people are making millions and millions of dollars, but they don't realize federally they can't write off anything, so they're paying 70% tax on revenue. Here comes Frank Matarese, and who is Frank supporting? He was, he liked the idea of labs because, I don't know, maybe they make donations to his campaign. I don't know. I can't look on the city website and find out. But who is he courting? That's the question I have. When he does something so absurd as to say a two-person business needs a labor peace agreement, who is he courting? And why is he doing that when a union attorney who sits on our council as our vice mayor suggested we half the state limit, which was already extreme? Why does Frank bring it down to two? So you ask about Frank Matarese? I don't know. I read Frank Matarese's blog. I suggest everyone does. He explains himself and he writes quite well. But again, I come up with these fundamental questions. Who are our council members serving? And I tell you, I would be a big fan of taking all money out of politics because at some level it seems to me they're either serving themselves to get reelected or they're serving somebody else who can put a lot of money into their reelection campaign. And what they should be doing is serving the people. So I'd be a big fan of having like every citizen in Alameda throw $20 into an election and have no additional money be available and split that money pool. Because I don't know who Frank Matarese is serving, to be honest with you. He's not serving the people of Alameda unless he's serving the 1/3, and he was elected not to serve 1/3, but to serve 100% of the people of Alameda. And who is he serving? That's, I guess, my question. So this guy, Frank Matarese, we elected him last time. He's obviously, the choice of the people. But now I think the people should look at all of our representatives again, not only based on this issue, as we said earlier, but based on the idea of who do you represent. And I don't know, maybe they need to take a pledge that the people come first. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that would be great, and but I'm not a Pollyanna. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's to get elected, you are generally indebted. And that's the one thing I loved about Trish's campaign, Trish Spencer. She represents
the people.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So, like you brought up Trish's campaign. I'm not sure of the exact fact. I think that somewhere her campaign got about $11,000. So that came from the people. That did not come from big business. That did not come from big developers. That did not come from the Democratic Party or some big unions. That came from us. And the wonderful thing about Trish's mayor is she knows, gosh, she probably knows everybody on this island, but I'd be willing to make a bet with somebody for $1 as she knows at least half the people on the island. That's what we want. We want our people to know us, and because then they can represent us. So that's my idea, too. Like, I love Trish's campaign, and I voted for her. I'm not ashamed to say that, and I voted for her without knowing much about her except for reading what, was put out in the pamphlets and what she stood for. And she stood for Alamedans. I believe her campaign was Alamedans first and stuff, and that's what we believe in. And now, as Alamedans have to deal with more traffic, and they have to deal with more development and rising rent prices and all these things, who's going to better represent the people? Is it going to be somebody who hears and knows the people, or is it going to be somebody who serves some other master? I personally would like
as you brought up, is a good chance to understand Frank Matarese is to understand what his future, what he thinks his future is. Do you see him running against Trish?
I don't know. The upcoming election is going to be interesting. I personally had felt for a long time by watching city council interaction that Marilyn Ezzy Ashcroft may run against Trish because she certainly was interested in the job last time and such. But as politics change, I don't know. I don't follow it that much, to be honest with you, but I'm starting to pay a lot more attention now because of this issue that my representatives didn't represent the island community. And so I'm going to start looking into that more because if Frank does choose to run, then I think the cannabis community needs to come out. Remember, 68% of the people who voted needs to come out and tell him, don't bother wasting your money, buddy, because we don't want you. And this is where this whole thing is going with me, Ralph. Like, we now found out through this issue that 68% of us think one way on adult use and cannabis in general. So that means 32% of our neighbors don't think that way, and they're our neighbors, and we want to be respectful and everything else. But it's clear it went to a vote, it's done. So they need to understand that, and we all need to be respectful of each other, but let's understand that if you're not going to do what you've been put in your office to do, then I don't know. Does it get so?
Well, you could ask him what the rationale for not being behind the people and representing the people is.
I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but wouldn't it be great if every Alamedan who voted for cannabis, somewhere probably around 30,000 of us, wouldn't that be great if we each wrote to the two city council members who voted no, and the other two who voted against adult use or didn't want to discuss adult use, and asked them to explain to us why? Could you imagine Frank Matarese and Marilyn Ashcroft getting 30,000 letters saying, we appreciate that you voted no. Please explain to us why, as the 68% of the city, you chose not to represent us. And then they have to answer for their vote. And that is what I think is very democratic and very American. You voted one way. It's a public vote. Now answer to the people. And then the people will take that answer and decide what to do with it.
Maybe it's just possible that there are a lot of people satisfied with this council because, unlike the previous administration, you didn't have millions of dollars going into pockets, Russo and Gilmore and stuff, from SunCal.
Maybe
they like them just because there's no major scandal and big bucks didn't disappear from city coffers. So this is, in other words, we like you much better than the old guys. We'll just reelect you again, even though you're not serving us. you're not stealing from us. That you haven't been caught stealing from us yet.
Right. And that's my point. As Americans, as Alamedans, should we settle for a TV dinner when we have a 4-star restaurant? Are Americans so jaded that not illegal and barely passable is the new standard? I say no. We need to demand more from our politicians. And I don't just mean Alameda. I mean statewide, countywide, nationally. But we can no longer settle for there's no big scandal. No. How about a Kennedy-like goal? How about a goal of taking money out of politics? How about a goal of representatives living up to what the word means by definition? And so I see, maybe you're right. Maybe a lot of people are just happy that have things go along and not have a scandal.
See,
but
now I know why you say it. Now, that is saddening.
I agree.
Overwhelming grief comes upon me with that. If it's almost like we're voting again for the lesser of two evils, that type of thing. And
that's why we can put our foot down and we can stop this here. But more importantly than stopping anything, we can start something. And what we can start is the people remembering that we, the people, have the power. And that
Absolutely.
power can be expressed in a lot of ways. But we've been trained, as you said, by your holy triumvirate, not to know that we have the power and to trust that big government or big pharma or big anything has our best interests at heart. And it's time to understand, in my opinion, that when somebody demonstrates they have your best interests at heart, you can trust them. But if they demonstrate that they're in it for themselves or somebody else.
So you got a city council who is blatantly not serving the public's wants and needs and wishes. Shouldn't the AG be called in to see who these people are taking money from? You mentioned big pharma farms. They would love no marijuana. They would love it. How?
Right.
Wait, trace the money. Where's offshore accounts with these people? Who are they? Get the Attorney General in on something like this.
See, I don't think it goes that big, Ralph, and I'll tell you why. One is the city council is charged with voting on this stuff, and they did that. Two, donations to politicians are allowed as long as they're reported and they're legal, and nobody thinks that anybody's doing anything illegal here. So the Attorney General really has no play in it. The problem is that money is allowed in the system, right? And they're allowed to, and they report it, and they track it, and that's all fine. And what I think is let's turn the game around. If money's allowed, let's make it either unallowed or let's call them out and just put out what every politician is taking from whom. Now, that's already put out, but as I mentioned earlier, on the city's disclosure website, I can't see it. Now, maybe that's a technological difficulty. Lord knows there's a lot of them in the Internet world. But,
are they breaking the law by doing that? If it's the law that they have to disclose that information and they're not disclosing it?
No, I don't think so. Right off the bat, I'd say because the Internet is a tool. I am sure you can go to City Hall like you could for the last, million years and get that information. So I don't think there's any laws being broken, to be honest with you. However, and again, I'm not a lawyer, Alameda does have a Sunshine Act, and that would probably be worthwhile to pull up on the Internet and read, because the Sunshine Act may specify, but as long as the information is available to the people, I've never seen anything written specifying how it has to be made available, just that information is available. So,
okay.
Again,
I thought it had to
I don't
be
know,
available
but I don't
on
think there's anything
the city
nefarious.
website.
No, I don't think there's anything nefarious going on whatsoever. But what I am saying is money seems to be the root of the problem here, right? Like, If they're not serving the people, then theoretically they're serving either themselves for re-election or they're serving some other goal or master. But the only reason I could think of doing that, we're not in the movies. There's no super villains in these worlds. The only reason I could think of doing that is to get reelected and to get donations. But again, that's not why they were elected. They were elected by the people to serve the people, and if they're doing a good job, like you mentioned Trish's vote, I don't think Trish has a lot to worry about from a challenger because she's been doing a lot for the people. Now, granted, a lot of the people don't like some of the things she's been doing, so naturally that's called politics, right? However, most people on this island, it's been my exposure, feel that she is trying to curtail some of the problems we as Alamedans all agree on. Traffic, development, put some sensibilities into these things. And maybe I run in a limited crowd. I don't know. I can't speak to what, all of Alameda thinks. However, I do feel that if they're trying to bring money into Alameda, adult use is crazy. Let me tell you something else that's so crazy, Val, real quick. Under medical, the state has allowed delivery-only businesses. So that means no storefront, just a secured building somewhere, and then drop off at home, office, wherever you would want, theoretically. So those are perfect businesses for Alameda, right? Because it doesn't impact any Alamedan, doesn't impact any child. But the city expressly forbids that. They allow delivery from one of the two medical dispensaries, but the business, which would be so good for Alameda, and is one of the businesses that's the least expensive to start and maintain, allowing people of color, other people who've been affected by the drug wars, and certainly people without millions and millions of dollars, small business people, craft business, cottage business, to get into this industry. The city, once again, said, no, we don't think that's right. So why is the city people second-guessing the state on medical? Why are they ignoring adult use? Fundamentally,
why are they ignoring the people's vote? If the people think it's right, then you're representing the people. There's something wrong here. Am I right?
You are right. Now, the city council, the first week, every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month, the city council has their meetings, and if an agenda item is not being represented, right, just let's say your neighbor's fence is too high, or you want more taxi cabs, or you as an Alamedan have the right to speak at the beginning of the city council meeting at 7 o'clock about any issue that you want to bring to their attention. Now,
and if you wanted to bring marijuana to their attention, you'd get on at about 11:30 in the evening.
No, that's my point. Now that cannabis is no longer going to be an agenda item because it's been passed, it's not going to be on the agenda. So you get the right as a citizen to express your point of view about that issue because it's not on the agenda. So at 7 o'clock, you get 6 minutes to speak versus the normal 3, and it's not at 1 in the morning for agenda item 6F. It is at the very beginning. Any Alamedan can speak about any issue that's not on that night's agenda. And I would suggest that every month, leading up to next year's election, that we, as people who want adult use cannabis, explain to the city council that we feel they have made a mistake and done an injustice to the people. And then maybe they'll get into their heads that this issue is not going away.
Well, I think that can be effective.
I hope so. I hope that we can model a system here that people will look to Alameda and go, this is the way things should work. Maybe it's pie in the sky. Maybe it was that joint I smoked. Well, I won't say when. But I am in my own house, so that is legal in the state of California.
It's very nice of the government not to come in with guns a-blazing because you're smoking a joint.
Exactly. So I don't know.
They're getting so mellow.
I would encourage, and I know I get a little running on at the mouth about this issue. I know I get a little hot about this issue, but I'd encourage every single person listening to this podcast to write to the City Council of Alameda and express their point of view, whatever that point of view is, because it's only by listening to the citizens can we hold the City Council accountable. It's only if we expressly state what we want them to do can we
How many
ask
town
them
hall
why
meetings
they
did
didn't
they have before they decided this?
So the city was really great. So the city started having meetings and regular city council meetings, and as you know, we were there till 12, 1 o'clock, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning. And then at some point after 2 or 3 of those, the city set aside a Saturday meeting. So just about cannabis, and that went for about 5 hours. And all this is available online for people to see on the city's website. And so I would say somewhere it was a process of several months. So
okay, so if my thinking is if this particular city council didn't decide after all that input, if they decided to go against what 2/3 of Alamedans wanted to have happen, and have you and Melanie and Miss Golden, Sharon Golden, all explain, and Deborah Mendoza. I mean, I can think of hundreds, not hundreds, but tens of 15, 20 people got up there and articulately spoke what we're talking about now, and they put it out to them time and time again in these meetings. And Miss Ashcroft in these meetings, for instance, sat and stared into her computer the entire time. She not once looked up, made eye contact with the audience, didn't answer any questions. She wasn't going to change. She had an agenda. She wasn't going to change that. And I'd like to know where that agenda came from and who's greasing her in one way or another to think the way she thinks. And Odaby too, and Matteries, they don't just come up. They don't just hear the people speak and not listen if they don't have their own agenda.
Exactly.
Right? We put it out there to them. That's why I say it's hopeful if we keep writing more letters and this and that and express our views. It would be hopeful generally, but I don't think you're going to turn these people. I think these people had preconceived ideas. I don't think Ashcraft wanted medical marijuana. He didn't want any marijuana.
Nope.
I think
Matteries and Ashcroft, no cannabis whatsoever. They still view it as heroin. And they wouldn't even listen to the fact that they kept going saying it was federally illegal, which is true, but they wouldn't listen to the fact that the federal government also owns the patent that it's medicine at the same time the federal government's saying it has no medical value. And they wouldn't address that fundamental quagmire, in thinking, right?
Because the federal government is indebted to Big Farm. Absolutely indebted to Big Farm. And that's controlling us all. And
this
what
is why
happens is that we're a community that's addicted to opiates, and it shortens lives. Absolutely.
And that's why I think the people need to rise up, and that's why I think a ballot measure is an appropriate thing. We had several of them in the last couple of elections. Certainly L1 and M1 is burned into everyone's memory. Well, it's time we have a C1, as in cannabis.
Every marijuana smoker in this town should walk around with a joint going. Walk the city streets with a joint going.
You know what?
Try that.
East Bay Canna community is running a fundraiser, and we did shirts for them, these hashtag shirts. So the first one is going to be hashtag East Bay Canna Proud, but the second one is hashtag Free the Weed. Don't tell anybody. It's supposed to be a surprise. But
we'll keep it a secret here on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everyone in Alameda should start walking around with a hashtag Free the Weed, because that's what they've done. They've re-imprisoned cannabis when we, the people, and the state has acknowledged that this is not a problem. Many states have acknowledged. Over 30 states, or at least 27, I don't know the latest count, has acknowledged medical marijuana. The country has changed. The country has realized, just like alcohol, that prohibition does not serve the interests of the populace because it allows for large cartels to manipulate it. The country found this out with alcohol, so they repealed that legislation and chose to regulate it. Now the same thing is happening with cannabis. They're realizing that the social ills created by crime are greater harm to the public safety than regulating people's relaxation. And that's why I think, I keep saying it throughout our conversation, but when the representatives don't represent, it's time for the people to act. And
you're going to act and get it together so we can. What is it? A referendum? What are you looking to do?
I would love it. I'm going to look into it. I don't know how possible it is. We're on a short time frame. It takes money, but it would be my dream that come November 2018, there would be a ballot measure on the local Alameda ballot that says that adult use is legal in Alameda, and we want adult use sales in Alameda. And additionally, because cannabis would then be on the ballot, I would expect and desire, I guess I couldn't expect it, but I would certainly desire it, that all 5 of the current sitting city council members and all challengers to their office expressly state their opinion on cannabis, adult use, and medical as it relates to Alameda. So that's what I would like to see in my pie-in-the-sky world.
Well, let's go for it, Richard, and you'll come back and you will keep us up to date on what's happening, I trust.
I will, and as soon as, shout out to Melody Montgomery for creating the hashtag, but hashtag Free the Weed, as soon as those shirts are available, I will let you know, and we can spread the word.
Well, for all of those out there is a First Friday East Bay Canna meeting. It is not just a meeting, it's a fundraiser, specifically a fundraiser. Tally and I will be there. Hope to see everybody from the community there. That's tomorrow evening. And check out the East Bay Cannabis site on Facebook and get directions. And this is, like I say, a fundraising meeting, and the money will go for good cause. So
one of the guests of honor, just so you know, is going to be Dennis Perrone. Talk about history in this movement. None of us would be talking about this if it wasn't for Dennis, and he's going to be there. So come on out and meet Dennis.
Meet him and take a picture with him, and tell him how much you appreciate the work, what he's done. It's nice to hear every now and again, I'm sure, for him. So let's honor him tomorrow night, and we look forward to it. Thank you, Rich Moskowitz. You're terrific. And those of you listening, it's a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all. See you next week. Weak link? Huh? What? So I should be in radio. See you next week, everybody. Thanks again, Rich.
Thanks, Ralph.
All right. Be well.